and welcome to everybody. Great to see you all here. And I'm also, in particular, very pleased to welcome Sister Michelle Nailon, who I've known for more than 40 years, since I was a worker for the Melbourne YCW back in 1978 to 1981. At that time, if I remember correctly, Sister Michelle was working as an industrial chaplain, and I'm sure she'll be sharing some of that experience with you tonight. She has a great number of involvements and a great deal of expertise in sociology and issues related to workers in different fields of work and industry. She has a great number of international contacts, and that's what she'll share with us tonight. Thank you very much.
Thanks for your interest, and I'm hoping the few things I say will be of some help to you. After the Vatican II documents were released at the end of the 1960s, I went through these and was struck in particular by Gaudium et Spes. It was apparent from documents like this that the Church was calling upon its membership to go out into the world. There was a challenge to become involved in its operations. Around 1974, I found out that women were now allowed to go to a faculty where they could study formal theology. I was given permission to go to the United Faculty of Theology in Parkville in 1975-6. In the 2 years I was there was opportunity to interact with theological students from the range of non-Catholic churches. In the second year, we were inviting speakers in, and one of these was Laurie Stiles, an Anglican priest from ITIM, that is Interchurch Trade and Industry Mission, which was providing chaplains from its 10-member churches to factories and other workplaces. The next year, I actually joined ITIM. I was working in the office with Alan Scott of the Uniting Church. Alan had a focus on sociology of religion. At the time, I was also studying this subject with the Jesuit Noel Ryan. In ITIM, there was always a problem with regard to funding, as I preferred to focus on education, the work of my congregation, rather than chaplaincy. I stayed on with ITIM for 9 years until 1986. After this, I became a temp typist around industry to bring in some income as required by the Brigidines. I went to over 100 workplaces altogether. At first, in my efforts to continue on with the missionary outreach to industry and working from a Catholic base, I was under the supervision of a committee set up by the YCW. This was the only Catholic organisation specifically interested in the workplace. Towards the end of the 80s, an accountant called John Roseman of the Melbourne Overseas Mission was trying to set up and run a UniAPAC Congress. UniAPAC is a Catholic-based international organisation for business executives. John argued that there was not much point in the church giving money to developing countries like PNG when these places would be better off being trained into how to get involved in business. Eventually, Laurie Stiles of ITIM gave John access to his list of business executives in Melbourne. Then, via another contact, John managed to get John Ralph, the CEO of CRA, to chair a planning committee for the setting up of a UniAPAC Congress. This took place in Melbourne in 1988. There's the book that came from it, right? Next bit. As an organisation, UniAPAC dates back to the famous Rerum Novarum document of the 1890s, and its mandate is parallel to that of the Jossist movement of Cardinal Cardine. The present Pope actually recently addressed one of its gatherings. UniAPAC, which is based in Paris, puts out a major document about every 2 years. These documents would be similar to the present Pope's Laudate Si, or John Paul's document on human work. I have described UniAPAC in a website called www.onbuildingasociety.org. Also available on this site are the text and even recordings of the 1980s Congress. John Roseman and friends managed to pull off a successful UniAPAC Congress in Melbourne at the end of the 80s. However, after that, we had the challenge of trying to continue on the momentum of the Congress. This was the hard part. John gradually found that the business executives on his committee were retiring. In that sense, they were no longer business executives, and we did not have the background mechanism for enlisting more. Around that time, at the start of the 90s, ITIM had a burst of growth, but that was really in relation to the recession. After that, the organisation began to fail, partly because industry chaplains were being replaced by counselling specialists. ITIM has now merged into something else. In the meantime, a small group of us, assembled by John Roseman, continued on, and we had some interest and support from Father O'Sullivan SJ. However, I felt at the time that we didn't have a real program to work from. Also, from meeting to meeting, one could never be sure if anyone would turn up. I put out a suggestion to the group that it get incorporated. A member, Damien Smith, was keen, but the suggestion spelt the group's death knell. For a while, some of the group, namely Damien Smith, organised a breakfast for business people, and this worked out quite well. But Damien couldn't sustain the effort involved. Damien himself later had a successful career running industry workshops. As regards the business executives, one person interested in keeping some sort of contact going was Archbishop Pell. In the mid-1990s, with the help of Hayden Ramsey, Pell set up a series of meetings for business people. However, by that time, the pedophilia in the church had become more public. This undercut any claim that the church may have had about leading any sort of workplace ethics program. Later on, when he was Archbishop in Sydney, Pell did have more success in this area. I gather there is still a breakfast mass for business people there that continues on. For my own part, I have continued trying to develop some sort of ethics education program for industry. After 2000 on, to cut a 23-year story shorter, I did a sociological semiotic analysis of the Gospels. This was no mean feat. In order to put the Gospel texts onto the emerging internet without breaching copyright, I had to put up my own translation. My translation was based on a paraphrase of the literal translation of the Revised Standard Version of the Gospel. This here is a hard copy of the analysis. And this here is just a copy. That's the RSV interlinear version of the Gospels. So over the years since, the internet has turned out to be my salvation, because at the local level, there has been almost total disinterest in the gospel analysis. Things on the internet have slowly improved. Last month, I had a record 3,300 unique visitors to the websites, and there were many downloads. This here is a copy of the www.realitysearch.com.au. Just that's the opening page, but there are associated websites, not very good viewing. Sorry. Now I've lost my place. The gospel analysis was really a continuation of the sociology of religion course done with Noel Ryan SJ in the 80s. It revolved around a question as to whether or not the gospel writers were aware of Greek philosophy and whether or not they provided a critique of this in their gospel structures. I wrote up a 100,000-word self-supervised thesis on this subject called "Is There a Critique of Greek Philosophy in the Gospels?" There have been about 600 downloads of this so far this year. Now, this is the only hard copy. For me, the end product of the analysis has been the realisation that Christianity consists of the hybrid of Judaism and Greek philosophy. It operates from two quite differing worldviews. The one is largely based on the sense of time, the other largely based on the sense of place. In the cosmic sense, time and place make up the bubble of what we live in. I'm still working on analysis offshoots. In the meantime, I have had the backup of a small tax-deductible organisation called Project Employment Incorporated. This dates back to 1990 and it replaced the Supervisory Committee of the YCW. Over the years, one of the things Project Employment Incorporated members have kept telling me is that there is some sort of blockage regarding use of the gospel analysis with any sort of study groups. At the local level, this blockage has continued on, and it also reaches into academia as well. Thus, despite the readiness of 3 professors to help supervise the writing of a PhD thesis on the analysis, I could never get any Melbourne biblical academics to take an interest in it. On the other hand, of course, new insights have been thrown up by the analysis. One of these in particular has been in relation to the moral dilemmas caused by money, power and sex. These dilemmas are universal. Actually, it is said that the Murdoch media is based on these 3 things. In any case, the 3 social challenges are dealt with in the commandments of thou shalt not kill, commit adultery or steal. They also form the basis of the 3 vows of religion, that is, poverty, chastity and obedience. In fact, these 3 same vows are not only found amongst Catholic religious, but in Buddhist monasteries as well. While I was trying to find a supervisor for a PhD thesis, I did 6 biblical subjects around 1912 to 16. In my essays, I traced the money, power and sex themes through the different gospel texts. The essays explored how the dialectical tension within Christianity has constantly raised the bar of the commandments. In fact, arguably, the tension between Judaism and Hellenism is at the root of development in Western society. A few years ago, I did another 100,000-word self-supervised thesis on this particular subject called Is Christian Morality Unique? These are 2 of the books that come from that. However, they're not as popular as the first one as regards downloads. However, getting back to the structural problems of providing any sort of program on ethics to industry, we constantly hear people like Malcolm Turnbull lamenting about the poor culture of various organisations such as the banks. We hear of the failings of accountancy organisations like PricewaterhouseCoopers. Even now we are hearing of the ethical failures of its rival KPMG. We can ask questions about where in the Australian boardrooms are the pillars of the commandments, thou shalt not kill, commit adultery or steal. Ironically enough, for 10 years, I worked part-time to earn money in KPMG, the accountancy rival of PwC. KPMG had a real interest in running ethics workshops in industry, and I understand they still do, but I'm not sure how they will manage this with the latest scandals. While at KPMG at various times, I saw some of the things on ethics that they had sketched out. But to me as a Catholic, I considered that their morality programs lacked a basic structure. That is, a structure based on the framework of the commandments. In other words, I believe that the Catholics could have done a lot better. I'll just hold up the sort of thing that, if you can see, this is the sort of thing anyway that you get in an ethics program. I'll just read out some of the things. Business ethics is ideology, trust, philosophy, principles, values, honesty, rules, behaviour, awareness, integrity, reliability. Morality is just tacked on to the end somewhere. As far as I was concerned, it didn't really have a proper basis. But as the years move on, the question still looms large. How to get a specifically Catholic religion-based structure of ethics programs into industry. It seems that the traditional answer here has been to train up Catholic kids in Catholic schools so that they can go out into the world later on and improve the world, a bit like Go the Mass has ended. But this only partly answers the question of how to operate in the world, and certainly the Vatican II documents expected more. I believe that people like George Pell felt the same here. I also believe that Archbishop Comensoli would agree. As regards Comensoli, it appears that he is in the background of a new venture that has started out in the Catholic circles called Melbourne Catholic Professionals. It appears the setting up of this initiative has the aim and potential to reach people like business executives and network amongst them. However, in terms of this initiative, one can ask whether or not networking on its own can go far enough to establish an ongoing connection with an organisation like UniAPAC. How could it promote the use of UniAPAC documents or the running of a UniAPAC Congress? Would it have enough influence for a general take-up of religion-based morality programs amongst people in the overall workplace as well? Earlier on in this talk, I told how John Roseman back in the 90s had a business executives group operating, but the members gradually retired and so did their links with UniAPAC. In fact, what John needed here was the support of an ongoing organisation outside the executives group. He needed some sort of backup which would keep on trying to recruit current business executives. One could ask here, why bother to try to set up an ongoing network of business executives? Why try to market church-based programs on ethics amongst them? Businesses already run business ethics workshops in some form or another. However, the thing is, as I said, would still say, they could do better. It becomes fairly obvious here that the executives, as the leaders of organisations, would need to be on side if church-based workshops were to take off and be endorsed by their organisations as a whole. The resulting difference here is that instead of about 5 people coming together in an informal network to reflect on an issue, you could have thousands of employees working through a program which would be part of their initiation into the values of an organisation, etc. In my own view, I think the networking of a diocesan-based professional persons network could go far, but there also needs to be some sort of structure in which people do the hard slog of formulating programs from church-based material. There needs to be people who keep on going with their theological education. There needs to be people who are prepared to get out there and take the knockbacks, etc. Perhaps members of a religious order could provide programs based on thou shalt not kill, commit adultery or steal, which is the base of the commandments. In fact, this would open up a whole world of missionary endeavour for them. But at the present time, orders are at a very low ebb. One wonders, is there the possibility of an infrastructure within industry that they could work from or with? One of the countries where UniAPAC has taken off is the Philippines. In fact, the business executives there had an active role in the overthrow of the corrupt Marcos government in the 1980s. But if we look more closely at the Philippines, we find there are workers there attached to the Caritas office who network full-time with business executives. For example, Teresa Nieva of the Philippines Caritas office, who helped with the Melbourne Congress in the 1980s. In Australia, it wouldn't necessarily be the Caritas office that provided structural support for the recruitment needed for a UniAPAC Congress. In fact, Hayden Ramsey, who helped Archbishop Pell in the 1990s, has tried to keep up contact with business executives from the basis of the Australian Catholic University. He has been on the governing body there. However, I doubt that his successors there are prepared to carry on his particular interest in this. There needs to be a structured organisation that is more focused. Size and numbers are not necessarily the requirement here. They would need some sort of finance, of course, but the main thing is the clear aim. John Roseman in the 1980s was a single person who had the interest of Archbishop Little and the support and interest of his wife Hilary, and that was about all. But John as a lone figure pulled off a UniAPAC Congress. If at the time there was a structured support base for him, I suggest here the Cardine Institute or something like it, he would have been in a much better position to keep the momentum of the UniAPAC Congress going. In my own situation, I've prepared a number of workshops on money, power and relationship. In May, I met Des Ryan of the Catholic Australian Cardine Institute to pick up some ideas about moving forward with these. Des suggested a number of Catholic-based organisations, but with the suggestion of Catholic-based organisation, there carries the need for a follow-through with another set of workshops leading into the relevance of the Eucharist. So at present, I'm off on yet another follow-through of the analysis. I close with the suggestion that the current ABC's Four Corners program on the ethical failures of KPMG show that there indeed is an ethical vacuum in industry that a church-based movement could fill. I suggest that the Cardine Institute is a possibility here. So there you go.
Thank you very much, Michelle. That's incredible. Yeah, what a lifetime of experience and things that you've done and achieved. Yes, really amazing. We'll have to get the link to one or more of those websites that you mentioned so that we can share them with our participants. Yeah, really good. I think, Brian, do you want to chair the questions or comments, or shall we just ask for people who'd like to, if anybody got any questions or comments they'd like to make?
While pardon me, while Sister Michelle has been speaking, I've had a look at the UniAPAC website, and if anyone would like to look at it even while we're talking, you'll find it at UniAPAC, UNIAPAC dot, I think it's .org.au. I'll just check. No, it's .org. Sorry, it couldn't be .au. .org, uniapac.org, and they've got quite a lot of information there. I've had a look at the website previously, and they're very good on the application of Catholic social teaching in the business context.
I see that Kevin's got a comment there. Kevin Wright. Do you want to speak to that, Kevin?
I just think I'm still involved with the schools, and we really don't touch base with the workplace in many ways. It's harder than ever, I think, to get into voluntary capacities because of all the intricacies of working with even, say, St. Vincent de Paul Society. But trying to develop that moral background in students at school, I still think is a very valuable thing to continue in the Catholic schools, and I do see them as having a role to play in developing a morality for the workplace, especially in the absence of one as we see the world today.
Would you like to make any comment on that, Michelle?
Yeah, I agree. I think that the Brigidine, the schools connected with Brigidine, they're spending a lot of time on justice programs. The other side of this that as I mentioned in the talk, preparing kids is the traditional way and it's valid, but I think that we're being challenged by Vatican II and what follows from that to do more. I think that ITIM found people in the business world were quite receptive, but it's just a matter of getting the foot in the door. And as I mentioned, KPMG were running ethics workshops, but there are a number of people running ethics workshops, but there's nothing really to stop the Catholics from getting in there and
No,
doing.
it still hasn't come on. You there?
Can't you hear?
You need to mute yourself, Kurt.
Well, I've done that and still nothing happens. I'm muted now. He's turned me off. I don't know what's going on. I can't see where I've never had this problem before.
Yes. I think we hear Kevin in the background trying to get himself connected to the meeting. I'm not sure how to help him. I think he's online with somebody who might be able to help him, but I'm afraid I don't know how to do that. Yeah. So I think
just make sure you're unmuted.
I'm unmuted.
Kevin, you got to mute
There's no
yourself.
sound coming through.
Kevin, we can all hear you in the middle of the meeting.
You can mute him. Hang on, Kevin.
Righto.
All right, everybody's muted now, except me, I think. So, has anybody else got any questions or comments that they'd like to make? Yes, yeah, Des, go on, Des. Yep.
Yeah, thanks. Sister Michelle, Des here. Good to see you. Do you think Australian Catholic University should be playing a role in business ethics through the various faculties to do with business studies?
Now, you'll have to unmute yourself also, Michelle, now. Where's Michelle? There.
Yeah, Hayden Ramsey's been trying to do that at the governing body level, and it is one of their aims. And they have a Jesuit who's working there. And part of the UniAPAC spin-off was that the Catholic University said, all right, well, one of the aims of, say, John Roseman was to try and educate people in developing countries to do business in a better way. And the Catholic person from the Catholic University who was around at the time said, well, that's something that we can do. And they actually set up a whole department, and they called it after John Ralph, this John Ralph department. And yeah, so it was a whole business department which was set up as a kind of a spin-off, if you like, after that UniAPAC conference. But yeah, okay, so they're providing some sort of ethics workshops or development for people coming from developing countries, possibly, you know, university students, international students, but it doesn't necessarily touch the mainstream of workers. So they're trying to do their bit, and Hayden Ramsey's been trying to do his bit. And he felt that he was getting further with the people in Sydney than in Melbourne. He thinks that there are blockages in Melbourne. But yeah, so they're trying. He's probably coming up to retirement soon. He was going to put me on to somebody who they just recruited, but I don't think that fella really understood what Hayden Ramsey was on about. So, okay, they're doing their bit, but is that enough? You know, it's not getting out into the mainstream. I just sort of felt anyway that there's some sort of vacuum that somebody can fill, and you don't have to do it in a major way, but just to kind of provide some sort of an infrastructure there so that there's the possibility.
Actually,
of
if I can
Go on.
If I can make a comment myself, it reminds me of the difficulties faced by the YCW today, in fact, and the YCS even. Everything sort of at school levels, depending on school education. And actually, there's nothing for people that are post-school now. It's inverted commas youth ministry. It's as if the church can provide all these services for people, but the concept of a movement of people getting organised together has somehow disappeared from the church since Vatican II, and I think in a sense, as you suggest, in contradiction to what Vatican II was hoping for. And I think it's a real problem that we need to look at. Yeah. If you have any comment on that, welcome.
Do you mean me or?
If you do, or anybody else, yep. But I think it's just it's the way the church has gone. It's kind of turning into an institution providing services rather than the people of God organising each other and ourselves. That's kind of the sense that I have of things that are happening. Yeah. For example, well, one of the points I've made recently is it's very striking at the synod, the forthcoming synod, the first session of the synod on synodality, the synod on walking together. There's only 3 representatives of grassroots movements have been invited to participate. One is from Focolare, that's the only international one, and the 2 others are Italian. It's as if the church has lost touch with movements and grassroots organisations. And there's a huge contrast, for example, with the synod on the lay apostolate back in 1987, where there was around 20 lay movements invited. So it's kind of like the professionals are taking over. And there's a whole forgetting around the concept of movement and bringing people together, whether it's business people or workers or people in other categories. Yeah, that's my personal reflection anyway.
Yeah, well, after that pontifical thing that we had a couple of years ago, if you remember, in Australia, I wrote around various members of the people preparing the initial papers and said that there's absolutely no mention, as far as I can see, of mission. And then I brought in the bit about UniaPAC as one of the possibilities, and Comensoli wrote a really supportive letter, and a number of the bishops agreed with what I was saying. I do think they're starting in Australia anyway to try and do something, but at a macro level, I think that the whole role of Jesus Christ, who is he? I think that's shifting because we're becoming far more cosmic in our understanding of who God is. I think there's a big shift going on underneath as regards who is God, what's the incarnation mean, where's the role of the Mass? All these things, yeah, they're sort of evolving as far as I'm concerned. There's a big shift going on. And I think that we're gradually getting somewhere with it, but it's taking time. And yeah, so that's about as much as I can say. But I do believe something's going on underneath and it's moving forward. And it's just this shift in our understanding of what the church is and who Jesus Christ is and what the Mass is. So anyway, I'll let someone else talk.
All right. Well, that's a lot of things to pick up on there. Were you going to say something, Reg? Did you have a comment to make?
Yeah, thanks, Steph. I think your observation about this professionalisation or the service model, I see that a bit. I draw the parallel with the union movement. They used to talk, and I know my experience is probably a bit dated now, but they used to talk about how unions in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s got lapsed into what they call the service model, where they sort of moved away a bit from grassroots organising, relied on institutions and institution structures, I used to liken it to, like, a lot of people thought union membership was like the auto teller. You just go and press the right buttons and the money would pop out. But as far as actually, being active in workplaces, which I see reflected in your grassroots movements, then when things change, you don't have the capacity to actually change with it because everyone's still locked into this service model. So I think that, if your analysis or observation is pertinent or correct, Steph, I think Michelle's got some grounds for optimism. But I mean, if we lock ourselves into a service model, I think the church is going to waste a lot of opportunities and waste a lot of time, because when things change, they won't be able to respond to things. And I always think of the old thing about faith through action too. Like if you actually take some action and you've got a more chance of empowering people than actually having something delivered to you on a plate. That's all.
Yeah, thanks very much, Reg. Actually, that reminds you of what Michelle said, which is exactly on that point, I think. The move from chaplaincy to counselling, that was very significant change that Michelle noted earlier. And I think, that's something that requires thinking. Brian, I don't know how much time we have got left. I don't know if there's maybe one more comment somebody might like to make. Otherwise, I'll hand over to Brian for the meeting part.
Okay. All right. I see that Bill's got his hand up.
Oh, sorry. Yep. Oh, and Paul also. Yes. Oh, there is people.
And
sorry.
he's muted too.
Yeah. Okay. Bill. Yep. Bill.
No, I just wanted to follow up. Sorry, I've lost your name now. The person who just spoke before. The service model. Reg. The whole of our society, organisations, the overseas aid field, the welfare field, the church, in the last 30, 40, 50 years, we've moved to the service model. We've moved away from the formation model, the what you might call the self-determination model or the community development model. All the organisations have been moved away. In the case of the overseas development field, it's been done largely by government taking control by controlling their funds. In the case of the church, in my view, after Vatican II, the struggle by the institution against Vatican II, because Vatican II was all about the Church of the people of God and formation and training and participation and so on. But there's been 30, 40 years, 50 years of fighting against that. And I think that's what you're confronting. And I think that Laurie Stiles, I had quite a bit to do with Laurie. I mean, they were again, I think, doing a very good job, but it again was a service model. It was a counselling model. It was not really a formation and training model. That's how I saw it. But and with John Roseman really was trying to get the overseas aid field into the model of much more like self-determination. But there was very little support for John, very little support for what was then Australian Catholic Relief to take that line. Now, that's just history. That's the background. That doesn't say anything about where we should go now. Just one final thing is an organisation called the Cranlana Institute or Centre, which is a Monash stroke Maya Foundation establishment, runs a whole series of ethics for business courses. And one of our ex-YCW key leaders, Jean Kerr-Walsh, has been involved in that for quite a number of years.
Great. Thanks, Bill. Do you want to make any comment, Michelle, on that? And then I see Paul Lenton had a question as well, or a comment.
I take his point about ITIM providing a service model, which was chaplaincy. We did try and develop educational programs. He did try. But yeah, it was all uphill, but it certainly tried. But yeah, hard to say, isn't it?
Okay, maybe I'll see Paul. Paul, did you have a comment or a question? Paul Lenton?
Yeah, thanks, Stefan. I guess continuing as a similar theme, I wanted to make a comment about the justice and ethics sort of approaching Catholic education, both at the schools and also probably universities. And I think what's happened there is it's been increasingly a focus on, again, that sort of service model where we might take, for example, a focus on supporting refugees and asylum seekers or supporting the rights of Indigenous people or something of that sort, which is all very admirable and obviously important. But what it's taken away from is the focus on reflecting on how we live our own lives sort of day to day and how we enact in a just way in the situation we find ourselves, that kind of social milieu we experience. And so I think that's really where a lot of the difficulty in business ethics comes, as we're focusing on doing something for a disadvantaged group on the margins rather than acting justly in the immediate context that we find ourselves. And I think that's where that justice and ethics education in Catholic education is probably falling down a fair bit as well. So Michelle may like to comment on that.
I agree. I agree. It really does go back to that thing that I was talking about with regards to that sociological analysis of the Gospels. And that is, on the one hand, you've got Judaism with its emphasis on the commandments and morality. And on the other side, you've got Hellenism, which was the open rationalism. Yeah, you've got that dichotomy that's kept going on. And I think that sometimes the Catholics, everybody tips too far into the Hellenism thing. Not that it's wrong, but it's just that they can lose sight of those basic commandments about, thou shalt not kill, commit adultery, or steal. Yeah. So trying to get the balance is extremely difficult. And I think with the Anglos and their drop off from the Catholic, from going to Mass, it says something about what's been going on underneath. I'm over here in the West, and with all the migrant communities, and they all come to Mass, and the kids come to Mass, and the young people come to Mass. And then I go up to an established parish like Ararat, and there's not a sign of a kid. There's not even a sign of a teacher. What happened to all these people up in those Anglo-based communities? I'm not really sure, but there's something going on. And I think that people have perhaps they've tipped too far into the justice model. But yeah, that's all I can say. I've just been watching it from a religious life point of view. But as I keep trying to say, I think that people's understanding of Eucharist has to be readjusted, and then that would follow through. But whether or not they get around to it, I'm not sure.
All right. Well, I think you've set us a number of challenges, Michelle, in what you've done and the questions that you've raised. So on behalf of ACI, I'd like to thank you for joining us and sharing all of that experience.